is not very detailed, but it covers the period 1966 to 1971. Now, in 1966, I was probably in eighth grade or so, but I was introduced to pigeons. My next door neighbor, well, not right next door, he was a neighbor about 4 houses away from us. And he was the dean of the uh, commercial faculty, the commercial faculty at University of South Africa, Willie Herbst, Uncle Willie Herbst. The, he had problems with his knees in those days, so he could not carry the pigeon baskets. If we or he filled them up with pigeons, to carry the pigeon baskets back to the car and drive maybe 30, 40, 50 miles to go and release them. So he would always ask me to come and help him carry the baskets to the car. Sometimes I rode with him, we released the pigeons, and most of the time the pigeons were back home before we were back home. But he introduced me to the pigeon flying, pigeon racing, pigeon farming, whatever you want to call it. And my dad eventually, for my birthday, built me a pigeon loft. It was about, I would say, 30 feet by 10 feet, divided into 4 sections. One section for my breeding pairs, 2 sections for my flying pigeons, and the other side also a side for my breeding pigeons. And
So you call it a loft, not a coop,
no, it's a pigeon loft. Yeah.
and it wasn't off the ground?
No, sometimes it depends on how. Some people built them off the ground. Sometimes it was on the ground, but it was called a pigeon loft.
Was yours above ground or on the
No, mine was on the ground, but a lovely brick, and it's a permanent structure with with metal sliding doors, not metal sliding, yes, metal barred sliding doors, aluminum, of course. But he introduced me to this pigeon racing, and I trained with him, and if we would catch the pigeons, he would pick up my pigeons and put them in the basket, put the basket in his car, and we would go and release them. And so I eventually joined PRPC, Pretoria Racing Pigeon Club, because I wanted to participate in flying competition, pigeon races. Before that could be done, now remember this is way back in the 60s and very early 70s. There was no such thing as a GPS. So you had to contract with a land surveyor to get and work out the exact coordinates of where your pigeon loft was so that the details could be handed over to the head honchos at the racing club. So when pigeons were, so that people could, no, so that it could be determined which pigeon arrived at what time, and if two pigeons arrived at the same time, the position of the loft was compared with the position of the other loft, so to see is which one flew actually the longest distance or shorter distance. It was one of those days, and I participated in a race from Potchefstroom, which was 100 miles in a straight line from where the club was located. Anyhow, I before I even knew it or realized that my pigeon was already circling the house on this Saturday morning, around about 9 o'clock, and so it landed, and it went in. I took the rubber band off its leg, which was placed the previous night at the club with an identifying number on the rubber band. I put that in the pigeon clock, turn the handle, and what happens is it stamps out the time on a piece of paper. So very primitive in those days. but it gives you the exact time that ring was clocked in the racing clock. And of course, it was sealed. You couldn't break the seal and put it in earlier, or retrieve it earlier, or mix with the time in. It was foolproof, or foul-proof, shall I rather put it that way. Anyhow, I won 150 rand. Now, 150 rand was equal in those days to $150, 1-to-1, South African rand compared to the US dollar. And my dad asked me what I was going to do with the prize that I won, the $150. I said to him, I saw a nice watch that I like downtown at not too far from where his practice was, at a jewelry store called Lever's Brothers, right next to the Van Skyke's bookstore. And he said to me, now, yeah, that's good, but why a Rolex? I said, well, that's a great watch. I'm regularly, I swim on a regular basis, and I loved spearfishing and lobster catching, and it would just do because I know a Rolex is an excellent watch. And besides that, my dad had one, so I also want one. Of course, mine would be much nicer and more modern. He says, this is all very good. He likes my idea. But what about the pigeon food? Shouldn't I be contributing somewhere to the pigeon food? And I hum and ah, and I really did not have a way out to argue with that. Because I knew if I contribute to the pigeon food, I won't have enough money for the watch. Eventually, I had no, I'm obedient kid, and I said, no, I don't think it's too bright an idea, but I can't, I can't argue the point. So he says, what about this? What about this plan? He will contribute $75 to pigeon food, and I contribute $75 towards pigeon food, which is $150. But if I contribute $75 to pigeon food, he will then also contribute $75 towards me buying the Rolex. So it was just a way of him trying to make me understand, hey, it's got to be a win-win situation, and trying to be responsible, how to work with money. And remember, these Asians don't fly or eat for nothing. They got to be fed, and the pigeon food costs money. Well, he taught me a very nice letter, and that following weekend I was down in Pretoria city center, and I went to buy that watch. Now, do the math. That was 1966. 1966. Do the math. Here is the watch. I'm wearing it. I've had it now for 60 years. Still running smoothly. No problems. Doesn't win. Doesn't gain time. Doesn't lose time. It's just spot on. That's me and my Rolex. Okay, let's see if there's another story that I have to do or tell you today. Oh, no. I still have another story to tell about the damn Rolex. We were down at Ballito, where my parents owned a vacation house or a apartment.
Age?
I was about maybe 18, 19, something like that. And I was diving for lobster. I was catching lobster. Now, lobster in those days are not these miniatures that they sell you in a restaurant here in America. Those lobsters had to have a carapace of at least 65 millimeter, which is just about 3 inches. The carapace, the hard part of the body, had to be 3 inches. With the tail, that thing was 12, 14 inches long. It was decent sized lobster. As I say, not these little miniatures they serve you in restaurants nowadays. And there was a limit on how many you could catch a day. You were limited to 8 lobsters. We call them crayfish. We call them crayfish, but you were limited to 8 per day during crayfish season. And they were very strict, the Parks Board, Natal Parks Board were very strict. Sometimes, especially early in the mornings or whatever, you could see them hiding in the bushes on the shores up on the sand dune. And how you would know that is they would be looking at you with binoculars. But what they forget is that they're looking into the sun. So every now and then their binoculars would reflect in the sun, and then you would know that's a Parks Board sitting there and watching you. And before you got out of the water, you got to measure and remeasure again to make sure that your lobsters, there was only 8, and that the carapace was not smaller or shorter than 65 millimeters. They were very strict. I'm telling you, very strict. If you came out of that water and you had a lobster that was not of size or within size or did not qualify as being large enough, you were subject to a fine, and depending on whether it's the first issue that you've had with them or not, your car could even be confiscated. So yes, they were very, very strict. So I think that's my part on the lobster. No, wait a minute. Now one day, that's probably the main part of this chapter, to put it that way. I was diving for lobster, and I was probably not paying attention. No matter what, hindsight is 50-50 or 20-20. I don't know why they call it 20-20, but that's for opticians to worry about. But I got washed over the rocks and reef by a freak wave. And my watch got caught, the watch strap got caught in the rocks, and the strap broke. I lost my watch. My watch that definitely was my most valuable possession, but I just freaked out. I lost my watch. I was looking for it and I couldn't find it. Looking for it and couldn't find it. And then I went back. High tide, low tide. Low tide, high tide. Every day in the morning, low tide, high tide, high tide, low tide, low tide, high tide. I went to go and look for my watch again.
How many days?
2 weeks I looked for that watch and I found it. 2 weeks later, I found it. No, not too far from where I had broken the strap. But, it must have been covered by sand or weed or whatever the case may be, or seaweed. But I found it right there in the open. I've looked there many times, but it wasn't there before. So it was covered by something, whether sand or weeds, seaweed or something. I found it.
What did you do? You found it.
Oh man, I put it straight in my lobster bag. Or I put it in my lobster bag, or I don't know. I probably wouldn't have done that. I would have I thought maybe I just held it in my hand. And I swam the hell out of there to go and tell my parents I found it.
So you had to swim into the water to look for it. It wasn't on the beach.
No, I got washed out by a freak wave about 150 yards into the sea.
I never got that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I had to go and look exactly, and
So you had to keep diving down?
I had to swim, keep diving down, look around that point, that rocky point where the wave caught me.
Well, that's tenacity.
Stubbornness, but I found it.
Aha.
I think that's all for today.
Okay.
Let's see.